delegate for the 51st District for our General Assembly. And I'm pleased tonight to have several guests here with us, among which is our governor as well. The purpose of tonight is an opportunity for us to hear from the governor and, most importantly, for you all to speak about long and short-term solutions regarding our transportation crisis. We're very lucky tonight to have several members of government that are here to support the governor, and I'll just mention the people that are here on stage with me, as well as some of the people in the audience. First of all, we have the Secretary of Transportation here tonight, Pierce Homer. On a state level, we've got Senator Colgan. We have John Jenkins from our board, who represents this area. We've also got the chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, Jerry Conley. Dave Marston's here as well. He's a fellow delegate and a supporter of the issue. I'd just like to say real briefly, we're very, very fortunate to have a governor who is very much in touch with the issues of transportation that we have to deal with. Also, the fact that he's taken such a leadership role in trying to help us here in Northern Virginia with our problems. He has in fact scheduled a special session set for June 23rd. There's meetings before, meetings after, and he's also come out with an express plan that he believes is a solution-oriented approach to our transportation problems. We here, and the governor as well, recognize that Northern Virginia is the economic engine of the Commonwealth. And it is not just a local issue. If we have transportation problems here that affect our quality of life, our value of our property, as well as safety issues, that directly affects the entire Commonwealth of Virginia, because our economics are such that Northern Virginia produces the majority of the dollars that are used around the state. So it's in the state's interest, as well as our locale, to solve the problems that we have in front of us that we're facing each and every day, trying to get around from place to place around here. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our governor, who's going to speak to you about a specific approach and thoughts about how we can solve our problems regarding transportation.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you all. I really appreciate everyone coming, because I know how busy everybody is. People have millions of places to be and things they could do. But the fact that you've come out tonight to dialogue about an important issue is something I appreciate. I applaud these local elected officials who have come out tonight, legislators and local elected officials who care deeply about this issue. I know I don't have to say to anybody in Prince William that transportation is a huge challenge. You know, this is the choir. You understand it's a challenge. But what has been so difficult is, frankly, trying to find a way in which the legislature can come together in a consensus to solve the problem. In fact, I chuckle as I stand here, because some of you might have been in a room, this very room, between Election Day and November '05 and Inauguration Day, January 2006, where I came up to talk about transportation. That was actually a listening effort to find out, okay, what do you think and what are ways to solve it? But I will say for about 2+ years now, I've been working with the legislature to try to find solutions. We've gotten a few things done. Since I became governor in '06, we've made some strides in better land use management practices that can help. We've made some strides in funding of rail and public transit with some efforts last year, and some strides in new construction of roads with a bond package that passed last year, House Bill 3202. Those have been good things. But we've also enacted a bill last year, that House Bill 3202, that had some pieces to it which were unpopular. We tried to figure out a way to come up with maintenance money by fining abusive drivers, but the citizens of Virginia said, look, nice try, but you got to do it a different way. So that was repealed. And there were 2 regional packages as part of last year's bill that the Supreme Court said, sort of nice try, but if you're going to impose taxes, it has to be the General Assembly doing it, not regional authorities. And so we are back trying to find an answer to solve a problem that affects quality of life. I yesterday announced that I was going to bring the legislature back on the 23rd of June, specifically to deal with this issue, because it is so important to Northern Virginia, to Hampton Roads, another very congested part of the state, but it's important all over Virginia. Sometimes it's different in the different regions, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it is very important that we act. You elect us to be people of action, not endless studies and endless debate, but action. And it is past time for us to act and provide meaningful relief here in Northern Virginia. None of the actions are easy. None of the actions are free lunch. I mean, transportation infrastructure is not cheap. As we drove in, you know that they're doing the reconstruction of the Neabsco Creek Bridge just right down the street. That's a $30 million project. We have 1,700 bridges in Virginia. That's just 8% of our bridges, 1,700, where we need to plan to do replacements. And so nothing is cheap in this line of work, but we got to face the problem squarely and try to come up with the best way we can to solve it. And that's what I want to do tonight. So for about 25 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about the magnitude of the problem and what I propose as what I think is a reasonable way to address it. It's a plan that I rolled out yesterday. I think it's a good, solid plan. I wouldn't say it's perfect. And I hope that the legislators, and this is the way it works when it works best, that the legislators will work to help take this plan and even make it better. If they can, that would be great. But inaction is really not an option. We must act. And so again, with that, I appreciate you coming out. It's good to be here in Prince William with so many good friends in a place where folks understand this issue. Let me start off actually by asking, if you think the transportation system in Prince William and Northern Virginia works great, why don't you raise your hand? Okay? The record will show there are 2 hands. Okay? So there are 2 hands up, and that means most think we could improve. Let's talk about how we improve it. First slide. The plan that I think we need to embark on in Virginia to really address our transportation needs basically has 3 elements. Safety first, regional relief, and transportation change. Those are the 3 things that I'm going to talk about. My plan addresses all 3. Let's go to safety first. A couple of things. Last year was the first year in Virginia where more than 1,000 people died on the roads of the Commonwealth since the drunk driving laws were put in place. You know, before those were in place, you would see large numbers, but we have very stiff drunk driving laws in place now. But 1,062 people died on the road last year. Sometimes that's because of behaviors, often that are irresponsible behaviors, but the safety and the condition of our roads and our infrastructure has a real bearing upon that as well. We do have an aging set of roads and bridges in Virginia. Here's a little guessing game. What do you think the average age is of a bridge in Virginia? We have about 10,000 bridges that the state, 20. We have 20,000 bridges, that's good to have a Secretary of Transportation sitting in the program, that the state maintains. You think about that, 20,000 in Virginia. What do you think the average age of a bridge in Virginia is? 25 years. 25 years, okay, how about another one? 30. Okay, 40, we're close. The average age of a bridge in Virginia is 47 years old. 20,000 bridges, average age 47 years old. And all of you know what that means. You could do the kind of basic year in and year out maintenance. But once a bridge or a piece of complicated infrastructure of that kind reaches that age, you have to start replacing it. And so Neabsco needed to be replaced for a series of reasons. We're replacing bridges all over Virginia. We all saw with horror this collapse of the bridge on Interstate 95 in Minnesota because it hadn't been properly maintained, because they were not spending the money they needed to maintain it. And God willing, that will never happen in the Commonwealth. But we have had to close bridges down. There are bridges in Virginia that are closed, and people are mad that they're closed, that we don't have the money replaced right now, but we've had to close them at great inconvenience. There are other safety needs that are important. You know, dirt roads in parts of Virginia that school buses still travel on and should be paved. Gridlock in Northern Virginia keeps emergency vehicles from promptly getting to accident scenes or getting back to the hospital. And in Hampton Roads, a very significant need is hurricane evacuation. We know that Hampton Roads is vulnerable to hurricanes. And so there are going to be hurricanes and weather events in Hampton Roads that will require evacuation of folks. But the road network there will not allow evacuation as quickly as we need to do. So there is a need to make sure that we are maintaining our roads and bridges in a proper way. Here's the challenge right now. We don't have enough money in the transportation budget in the maintenance fund to maintain roads and bridges. So let's go to the next slide. Move on over. There's a maintenance deficit. If you look at this red line, this red bar, maintenance deficit that every year gets bigger and bigger in Virginia. And so we'll go to 2007, if you can't read it, the maintenance deficit in 07 was about $300 million. By 09, fiscal year 09, it's $375 million. That is a sizable maintenance need that the maintenance fund will now not cover. So what do when we have a maintenance need that's big? Well, the legislature has given the governor the ability to go into the transit funds and go into the construction funds and pull monies out to maintain. So we kind of cobbled together maintenance instead of having sufficient funds to be able to do it in a really planned way. We cobbled together maintenance by going into these other funds and pulling money into the maintenance fund. You'll see that maintenance deficit, the red line, if we don't do anything, keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. By fiscal year 2014, it will be nearly $600 million that we will have to pull out of construction and transit in order to maintain our roads. This year, the $375 million that's coming out this fiscal year, of that about $80 million comes out of Northern Virginia. When we pull money out of the construction account, it comes out of different regional accounts, and about $80 million of it is coming out of the Northern Virginia account. So money that would otherwise be used in Northern Virginia for either for transit solutions or for improvements to the road system here gets pulled out to maintain because we don't have adequate maintenance money. So the first thing that we need to do, and we need to do this to have reliable and stable maintenance of roads and bridges, and we need to do it to free up dollars for construction and transit, is we got to fill up the maintenance deficit. So what I have proposed is to fill the maintenance deficit by doing two things. By raising the sales tax on automobiles from 3% to 4%. Right now, the sales tax on everything in Virginia is 5%, as you know. That's the sales tax. But the sales tax on autos is the one exception. It's at 3%. And if we need to find money for transportation, I would submit that we shouldn't have a sales tax on autos that is so much lower than everything else. So my proposal would be to increase the sales tax on autos to 4%. It would still be less than the sales tax on everything else. And increase the annual vehicle registration fee by $10.
Didn't you just
if
do that?
Those things, you raise in the first year about $400 million, and you fill in the maintenance deficit. So what you see is, instead of that deep red line of red ink, that means unsafe roads, unsafe bridges, and pulling money out of construction and transit accounts, you end up positive at least through 2014 and likely beyond. And so that is the proposal, and it will enable us to feel some confidence in the safety of our infrastructure. Again, I know that nobody in government, no citizen, wants to wake up one day and find that there's been a bridge collapse or that there's been something else that has put people at risk. When we know that we have a maintenance need, when we know what that need is, we ought to address it. Next piece of the plan, regional improvements. This is the one that I really don't have to tell you guys too much about because you know this so well. In Northern Virginia, 81% of those who are traveling are trapped in congestion during their drive to work, wasting on average of about 2 weeks a year sitting in traffic. That has a cost. There's a cost in hours. There's a cost in wasted gasoline. All of that has effects on the economy. It's more difficult to move goods and services and for people to move, and it's a hassle. You want to spend time with your family, you want to spend time at work, you want to spend time elsewhere. And so this congestion problem is very real. It's similarly real. It's not as severe, but it is very real in Hampton Roads. If you spend time there, the costing out of the lost time and fuel costs in Hampton Roads cost taxpayers $467 million a year. And so there is a need in the two regions of the state to provide relief and dollars that can be raised here and stay here to make sure that we put money into the infrastructure to ease congestion. Last year, the legislature passed a plan that imposed a variety of taxes and fees that would have raised about $200 million in Hampton Roads and about $300 million in Northern Virginia. Those ended up getting struck down by the Supreme Court. So as part of this plan, what I've decided to do is I want to put those monies back and do what the legislature intended to do by filling the need and finding solutions so that we can ease the transportation problem. So let's go to the next slide. So my proposal on this is a proposal that the legislators have talked about, which is to impose a local sales tax in Northern Virginia and in Hampton Roads of 1%. Not on food, not on medicine, 1% local sales tax. And if you do that, what you'll see is the red line is construction in Northern Virginia over the next few years for construction and for transit, roads and transit, the total budget in Northern Virginia without the plan. The blue line is what we can have if we invest. There's no way to solve these congestion problems in Northern Virginia with investments going down. You'll see the red line goes down in the future as the region continues to grow. If we want to provide relief, we can't spend less going forward. We have to be able to invest more in public transit and in construction. And the plan I propose would do that. And similarly, the next slide, you would see it do the same thing in Hampton Roads. Again, the needs in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads are a little bit different. In Northern Virginia, the congestion is more intense. Hampton Roads' problem is there's so much water that building bridges and tunnels over them costs a lot, and that's the challenge to solve congestion. So that's the second element of the plan. Again, I neglected to mention in the first part of the plan, which is dealing with the issue of the maintenance gap. Both the 1% auto title tax and the $10 registration fee were overwhelmingly voted on last year by the legislature as part of regional plans in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. It's a matter that has been previously voted for and supported by the majority of the legislature. And these local sales taxes have also been often discussed and voted on by legislators in the past. There's a third piece of the plan as well, and that's transportation change. We'll go to the next one. It is very important as we go forward, I believe, with gas prices so high. We're seeing all over Virginia and all over the nation people having a greater desire to use public transit. Greater desire to use bus, light rail, Virginia Railway Express, Metro, bus systems are seeing demand that is really growing very, very quickly. And so we need to have a set of funding that can go into public transit because Virginia has not been a heavy transit funder, but in the future we're going to need transit more than that. And so I propose what I call a transportation change fund. And change just means we will change the direction slightly so that it's not all about roads, but that it is more also about transit investments going forward. In this area, we know that building roads alone aren't going to solve our problems, and we've got to look for more rail and public transit options. And so let me make a proposal there. Next slide. Transit is important, obviously, in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, but it's also important in rural parts of the state. Seniors, those with disabilities, need some access to transit to be able to get to the doctor. Many people will be able to get to work and others. So there are transit needs statewide. Rail funding is important because with rail we can take trucks off the road, put them on rail. That helps ease congestion. The state has not been a big funder in rail. And we can also use some of these funds to promote things like telework and others that will enable people to do their work without getting on the road at all, which would be valuable. And so I also propose to fund this transportation change fund. How to do it? Last year, the legislature supported a 40-cent grantor's tax, meaning that on the sale of a property, for every $100 of value, you would pay 40 cents as a grantor's tax after sale. That would be imposed in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. I propose to do that not at the 40-cent level, but at the 25-cent level. And to use it this way, 75% of the money would be for rail and public transit. About half of the remainder, 13%, would be for economic development. When I'm doing economic development bills and trying to get jobs moving in Virginia, it's almost always the case that a company will say, we need a new highway interchange or we need a new rail access if we're going to bring jobs to Virginia. So if we could have money that would be used specifically for that, that would enable us to continue to have a very strong economy. Transportation is very tied to the strength of the economy. And then finally, the last piece of it, of that money from the grantor's tax would be for airports and our port, which again are powerful economic development assets. And so that's what the transportation change fund will do. If you could just look at the next slide, with these investments, we can increase our annual investments in rail and public transit from what had been a very anemic level of just about $50 million a year statewide to over $350 million a year statewide going forward. It would be a huge step forward in its transportation change because, as you'll see by the small amounts, we have not been investors in public transit in rail. This comes at a cost. I'm standing here and being honest and saying, look, there's a need. We have to invest, but there's no free lunch, and so if we are going to invest, we need to find a way to do it. I have wrestled with what is the best way to fund this, and in doing this, I've tried to use funding sources that have been previously identified and voted on by the legislature. I've also tried to stay away from one funding source that from a policy standpoint makes some sense, but that is very difficult right now, which is the gas tax, obviously. With gas prices being so high, there's a variety of ways you can raise revenue, but I believe that trying to put additional taxes on gas would be extremely difficult because most people view gas and food and medicine as one of the basic necessities of life. In many instances, needing gas to be able to get to work and get to other places. And so I have not proposed an increase in the gas tax. Let me talk one thing before I move to the next slide about what this will do in the Virginia economy. Because obviously right now in Virginia and in our nation, we are in some economic anxiety and in some uncertainty, with revenue growth and job growth slower than it's traditionally been in the past. I don't believe you can be a leader as a state, and Virginia has been a leader. We've been a leader as a state. You really can't be a leader if you don't have a transportation infrastructure that is top-notch. Every 3 years, there's a magazine that's kind of the Bible of local and state government, Governing Magazine. They do an assessment of state government performance. They give every state government a grade, from A to F in terms of how they perform. And for the second survey in a row, 3 years ago, Virginia received the top grade in the United States, tied with the state of Utah at A-. In March, Governing Magazine did this study again, and again they gave Virginia the top grade at A-, this time tied with Utah and Washington. But there was a trouble sign in the Governing Magazine study this year, which was they downgraded our grade on infrastructure. They assessed money, information, infrastructure, and people. They downgraded our infrastructure grade because they said, look, you guys aren't investing in the infrastructure. And it's infrastructure you need to be successful and attract jobs and have a strong economy. And so I really believe that even while there's some economic anxiety and revenues are slow, you can't afford not to invest in infrastructure, because if you don't invest in roads and transit, you really put an anchor, around yourself in terms of trying to continue to grow and be strong. And so I view these investments as very much that, investments in trying to have a strong economy going forward. And even more so, it's about jobs, because roads don't get built by magic, they get built by people. And if we invest significantly in road and rail improvements across this Commonwealth, we'll put people to work. We'll put people to work at a time when we need to. And we will enable people to have, jobs with dignity and spending dollars that will help in the short term expand the Virginia economy. It's not like we're spending this money somewhere else. We'll spend it right here at home, hiring people to do this very important infrastructure improvement in the Commonwealth. Now, let me move on, and I want to just focus for a minute on the cost. Go to the next slide on the costs. Well, first on consequences. We do a 6-year plan in Virginia where we look at projects that we want to do over the next 6 years. The recent estimates of revenue that we're going to receive if we don't make a change, here was a map of the Northern Virginia area. A little bit hard to see, but what you'll see is that there's a whole series of dots, and those represent projects that had been on the 6-year plan, projects that local officials and others said really need to be done in Northern Virginia. Many of these plans, and I think on my slides here, you might be able to see them somewhat better here. Is that before or after? That's before. This one might be a little bit easier. You'll see that dots represent projects that are in the 6-year plan. Some are green, meaning those projects are go, they're going ahead. Some are yellow. Those were projects on the 6-year plan that because of this maintenance deficit and slowing revenue, they're going to have to be delayed past the 6-year plan. And then there are the red dots. Those are projects on the 6-year plan that are going to have to be scrapped because there's just no money for them. And you'll see on this before map, the red dots are more numerous than the green dots or the yellow dots. Because again, that maintenance deficit sucks so much money out of the construction account that these projects where we're going to do significant work are largely going to be scrapped unless we do something different. If we are able to enact the plan that I have talked about tonight in Northern Virginia, you will see that a lot of the red dots change to green. These projects are going to come back on the list. Not every project, some still won't come back on the list. But a lot of the yellow, I think pretty much all the yellow dots change to green, and many of the red dots change to green as well. And so with this plan, which has both statewide maintenance money and the money particularly for Northern Virginia, we're going to be able to take a lot of these projects off the shelf and actually put them in place to provide transportation solutions for this region and for the rest of the state. Now, let me just do a quick version here at the end. I want to talk about the fact that, look, I've been said very candidly, we're not going to be able to make these investments unless we raise a couple of these revenue sources. So let me talk to you about the revenue sources. Virginia right now is 5th in the nation in per capita income, 12th in population, 18th in state and local tax burden. It says 18th lowest. I don't know if that's 18th or 32nd, but the one that I think is important, we are 39th in Virginia in taxes paid as a percentage of personal income. There's only one state that has as wide a spread between per capita income high and taxes as a percent of per capita income relatively low, and that's the state of Colorado. One of the things that we know is that if we want to have a transportation infrastructure that works, we're not going to get it for free. We have to be willing to invest. Right now, the transportation infrastructure, next slide, is funded by 3 main taxes. The motor vehicle sales tax rate, I mentioned that one earlier. In Virginia, we're at 3%, whereas the national average is 4.58%. And you'll see many states are at 5 or 6.5. Some states are at 7. There are a couple of other states like us that are at 3, and there are a couple in the Northwest that are at 0, but the national average is 4.5%, and we're at 3%. The next revenue source that we rely on right now for transportation is the sales tax, the general sales tax in Virginia. We use some of it for transportation. You'll see that the U.S. average sales tax is over 6%, but the Virginia sales tax is 5%. We're one of the lowest sales taxes in the United States. Finally, we rely on the gasoline tax. The gasoline tax shown on this chart is the combination of the federal tax, which is the same everywhere, plus the state tax. And you'll see that the U.S. average gasoline tax per gallon is 45.8 cents. In Virginia, it's 37.7 cents. So that's a good thing in a lot of ways. I mean, let's be thankful that we haven't gone hog wild on these taxes, but we're below, significantly below the national averages in the 3 revenue sources that we use to fund transportation in Virginia. You can have a B plus or A minus system if you invest at a B plus or A minus level. Or you can have a C minus or D plus system if you invest at that level. But there's no way to have an A system and invest at the D level. You just can't do it. And so the fact that we are so significantly below national averages in all these taxes is obviously one of the reasons why we're struggling to fund projects. And finally, every state can calculate how much they spend on transportation as a percentage of personal income. Virginia is one of the blue states, the states that spends below 1.2% of our income on transportation. Again, we are a low investor in transportation, and we will never, ever solve this problem unless we become a more significant investor. And so that's what this is about, and I'm going to say a few words to conclude, and then I'll open it up and take questions. What I have proposed that we do is basically decide, look, that we want to grow up and face our responsibilities and invest. I asked you at the beginning, how many of you think the transportation network works just fine? And in a room of, I'm not that great at estimating crowds, we probably have somewhere between 150 and 200 people here. 2 people raised their hand and said they think it's fine. Most people think there are serious challenges, and that is the case wherever I go in Virginia. There's only one way to solve the challenges, and that's to be willing to invest. Invest in safety, invest in congestion relief in the 2 parts of the states that need it, and invest in some change directions, particularly greater investments in rail and public transit going forward to serve more Virginians and Virginia businesses. With that, I appreciate the chance to come and just share my thoughts, and what I'd love to do now is open it up and answer questions. You don't have to sign in or anything. I may not be able to answer all of them just because at some point my voice will run out, but I'll probably try to answer questions for about half hour.